Hello there! In this video, I'm going to slowly guide you through this entire unit. It's actually a re-upload of a live stream that I made in the run-up to the 2025 exams. But you can follow along with me as I spend a few hours filling in this A3 poster. As it's a live stream, I respond to questions given to me by hundreds of real students as they prepare for their exams. I have 7 of these live streams that I've re-uploaded, and over the course of this year, I'm going to host the remaining live streams. And we record the old ones, so you've got a chance to take part. If you want to join me, then please subscribe so you get notified when I announce one of these live streams. It would also be great if you could subscribe because I just hit 94,000 subscribers. So pretty close to that 100k milestone. So if you're finding my stuff useful and want a free way to help out the channel, that would be amazing. Now, I don't do sponsorships for things like VPNs, but the other things I make are entirely focused on helping you get the best out of your A-level. And selling all these things helps you make the free content on YouTube. You can get this poster and posters for every unit, both completed and filled in as digital files and now as a revision book. You could also follow along with each of my main videos with worksheets. These are designed to give you an active role and make the information sticky. I also have an app for you to test yourself, and I let you use all the paper one for free without ads before you decide if it's worth unlocking papers 2 and 3. Altogether, it's thousands of pre-made quiz questions and flashcards. And I have over 17 hours of exam question walkthroughs, as well as lots of other resources over on Patreon. And starting now, I'm going to be doing an exam question focused live stream most weeks that are exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Thank you for listening to all of that. Let's get started. I'll also be using the chat window as well to talk to you guys. So we're going to start off on social influence. And of course, we'll start off following along the specification as it's written, going into types of conformity. So as you might expect, what I'll ask you to do is write on the piece of paper your notes or type into the text box what we're going to talk about. So let's start off. Types of conformity. What are they? There's 3 of them. I'm sure you know. What are they? Just the top names. Nice speed there from Shifa, the first one in. So, of course, we are going to be talking about identification, internalization, and compliance, not necessarily in that order. So let's start off by writing about compliance. So I'm going to say a few things. I'm actually going to say 5 things about compliance. Now, the way this poster works is I'm trying to summarize all of this information into as few words as possible so they'll fit on the paper and they'll just act as a trigger to memory. So we want to do it in as few words as possible so it'll actually fit in this space. You might want to just type in, I'll start pressing play now, and you might want to type in some of the things that you think I'm going to say about compliance. Just going to put in my Discord that I'm going live because I forgot to do that. Okay. So most of you guys got that. Temporary, shallowest level. We do it to fit in. We only comply when we're with the group, and we can make that link as well to normative social influence. Excellent. This is the A level. Okay, so there you go. What you can see I've done there is I've tried to show it typed up so you can read it. Okay, we're now going to go into identification. So good work on the last one, everyone. Let's do the same again, but do it for identification. What things do you think I'm going to say about identification? I've said 4 things. You pause that actually. Give it a type. I think this is the trickiest of the three, because it kind of fits in the middle. Interestingly, for the future years, they've actually taken this out of the spec, which is understandable. Okay, some good stuff here, but I think there's probably something I can say that we haven't had said. So we've definitely got intermediate level from a bunch of you. And we definitely got, kind of, they agree privately is may or may not. It's not necessarily one way or the other. And I think we've had the desire to be so associated with. It's kind of like, let's say you are in the army and you really, you've worked hard to be in the army and you really like being a soldier. Because of that group membership, because of the identification of being with those people, you want to feel part of the group. So you'll conform to their behavior. Actually, a better example of this is what I see often is I'll walk through the city and I will see lots of people in kit, football kits. Part of them wearing, they don't have to wear the football kit in order to go to the football match, but they identify with this football team, and the behavior of wearing a football kit is part of the process of identifying with them. I would say maybe there's kind of elements of both in there, but I wouldn't necessarily go down that direction because there's other things that we could say, and it does get a little bit messy. Like, let's say, like the football kit situation, like maybe you kind of start hanging out with this football team and whether the other supporters, and you're just looking like, oh, how is it that I express myself as a member of this supporters group? Oh, I wear a kit. That's not necessarily normative. It could be informational. Okay, let's go for the last one, internalization. Give me some stuff for that. As you type that out, this sense of personal value is often linked to our social identity. People feel personal value about, say, being a football supporter. Okay, lots of good stuff from internalization straight away. Sarah, that's really good. Okay, I will press play because you all done really well there. So yeah, we wouldn't expect an essay on this, but Zakira is right. You can talk about it in the context of explanations, which could come up as an essay. That's a really good example. I'm liking the example there. Okay, so we've got deepest level, accepts publicly and privately. The fact that it's permanent. Did anyone get... I can't see it. Continues when the group isn't present. And due to informational social influence. I started about 10 minutes ago, but you can just follow along with me from here. You can always double back and do the start at the end if you want to kind of stay in the chat at the same speed as everybody else. Okay, so for those of you who have just joined us, we've got 113 people now, so we've got a lot more. What we're doing in this stream is we are completing a poster for social influence. You don't need the poster. You can just use blank paper if you want, or a whiteboard, or you can just type in this chat as we go along. Sorry, May. Yeah, I was planning to do it yesterday, but my neighbours were being quite noisy, so I decided not to do it yesterday. Okay, so let's go for this. We're now into explanations for conformity. So first of all, type in nice and fast. What are we going to talk about here? What two things? Yeah, no difficulty here. One point to make, though, is if these questions come up and you're asked about types or you're asked about explanations, it is an absolute classic mistake to get them the wrong way around. Now, you might think it's silly. You're going to be sat there going, oh, I wouldn't do that. In the heat of the exam, when you're under time pressure and you want to get through these questions quickly, it's surprisingly easy to make a silly mistake. So just be aware of that. Slow down a little bit. Read the question twice, because this is a great example of an area in which people will get things the wrong way around. So you guys have no problems at all talking about normative and social influence. Normative social influence and informational social influence. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to say a bunch of things about normative social influence. So I've put 5 things down. What are we going to do? So what elements are there to normative social influence? Okay, we're sticking with normative. Okay, we've got some good stuff there. There's one thing that I can say that nobody's said just yet, but it's probably the more unusual point to make. Frey, yes, this live stream will be saved, and this will stay on for up until paper 1 starts at least. It's the other ones that won't be up for very long. Okay, so we have got, as most of you said, the reason that we do normative social influence is to avoid rejection. We also have the fact that we do it as a desire to be liked. Similar points, but it's maybe slightly different. Gain social approval. They all sound pretty similar. One thing that we can use as a distinction, a clear distinction between normative and informational social influence, is the reason that we do it is an emotional response, which is going to be different from the informational reason. So we feel an emotional urge to be liked. We feel an emotional urge to avoid rejection. We feel an emotional urge to gain social approval. So fundamentally, normative is about emotions. No worries, Zara. This is kind of why I'm doing it. Just kind of a, what's it called, blurting activity. We just go from down. Okay. So then I was going to ask, although that's appeared slightly earlier than I wanted to do, if we just had one evaluation of normative social influence, what are we going to do? I actually haven't decided when the other live streams are just yet. I'm just going to see how the timings lie up. What I probably will be doing is doing them when I finish the posters, because I'm creating these posters. The blank versions are obviously already made, but this filled-in version is my project for the next 2 weeks. I've actually almost done the psychopathology one, but I kind of want to release them in order. What I'll probably be doing is I'll be completing the posters, typing them as I go, probably kind of live on my Discord, in the chat there, and people drop in and out. But yeah, it'll be when I finish the posters. Okay. Yeah. So those of you that have typed in, brilliant. Very, very simple. Your evaluation for this section, I would simply just stick with, ASH. ASH is the actual core piece of research that shows normative social influence is a thing. No, there's a reason that ASH isn't both NSI and ISI and is very clearly NSI. Not talking about the variations here, but I'm talking about the core study. It was about stripping away any kind of informational social influence. So can anyone tell me in the chat why Ash is fundamentally NSI? Something about the task. The task is what? Yeah. It's unambiguous. It's absolutely clear what the correct answer is. People have to go against what they know is to be true. So yeah, that's how it was a test fundamentally of normative social influence. And as some of you have mentioned in the chat, yes, there is a variation which we can bring in some informational social influence, see the combination. But for all of the others, it's obvious, and the point is that it's obvious. Okay. So yeah, we're sticking in this video to just like the absolute fundamentals. Like if you're going to walk into the exam with enough, what are we sticking to? We're trying to get all of this information onto one A3 piece of paper and be sure that we've got the fundamentals down. We're not leaving any gaps at all. That's the point of these live streams, really. So there are lots of other evaluations that we could use, but I'm not going to go into absolutely everything. Okay, of course, now we're going to talk about informational social influence. Let's talk about the AO1. What are we going to say here about informational social influence? Okay, does that have to be right? Does that have to be correct? Is it? Yep. Does that have to be correct? Internalization. I have a Discord for my Patreon subscribers, usually very, very quiet through the year, but apart from right now, it picks up a lot. So yeah. Excellent. Okay, we're good. Leia, well done for picking up on the cognitive, which is the counterpoint to the emotional issue. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say, this is, as Carrot Sticks has said, in ambiguous situations, we've got a desire to be correct. And we have a belief that others are more knowledgeable. All of these things are things that you've said in the chat. And Leia's right, it is a cognitive. So we get into a new situation, we're unsure what to do. It's a cognitive process of thinking, okay, what is right here? What is the right option? And of course, if we're in that situation, we're then going to go, start a new job. Where do people hang their coats? They hang them over there. We're not hanging our coat there to be liked by them. We're just like, I don't know where to hang my coat. So you go and you hang your coat there once you see other people do it. And then, let's say the next day you arrive early, you're still going to hang your coat there. It's a permanent change. So yeah, I think we're good. Okay. So then we're going to talk about what are we going to do as our evaluation here. If we just had one evaluation, one research evaluation of informational social influence, what would we use? Yeah, Rihanna, that's what we're what study we use to evaluate this. Okay. So a lot of people kind of going off in a direction about some random but useful evaluations. Like, I'm not saying this is the only thing to use, but what I'm trying to say, and especially with this set of videos, is let's limit the amount of information we need to as few things as possible so we can remember it all. And if we can double up, this will be useful in one place as another. Let's do it. Now we're writing an essay about explanations for conformity. There is no reason why not, as a few of you have pointed out, to use the task difficulty variation of Ash, which we need to know anyway in some detail, because that is, a fundamental difference there, seeing that, okay, Ash's study on its own is an NSI. You add ISI, informational social influence, and conformity levels go even higher. So yeah, I would say, you go on essay here. We've got a research study for each. How often do I go live? Depends on the exam season. I haven't quite decided yet how many lives I'm going to do this year. I think I drafted it out probably about 25 hours, but maybe about 12 times up until paper 3. But I'm not sure exactly what dates. I'll post it soon though. Okay, so Ash, task difficulty increases. Then we have an increase in conformity. How important would you say is needed to get the correct percentage? Not as important as you think. Obviously, it's nice to see it, but it's not game-breaking to not have the correct percentage. Okay. Oh, I didn't press pause there. So we're now going to go for some critical evaluations. So what are some issues that we can say about informational social influence? You can't just use issues and debates and still get top marks. No, as evaluative, no. Okay, so we've got some good stuff here. I've noticed something that you've said there, lacks mundane realism. And this is a point that I'll make to all of you about evaluations that I think sometimes people get a little bit wrong, and they get a little bit tripped up about not actually evaluating the concept. So what we're talking about here is explanations for conformity, normative social influence and informational social influence. And then you've outlined them both and you've given research. If you just jump straight into an evaluation that says Ash's studies lack mundane realism, the task itself isn't like tasks if you're doing day to day, and just leave it there, you're not actually evaluating normative and informational social influence, are you? You're evaluating Ash separately. What you need to do is you need to link it all the way back to explanations for conformity. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I'm saying that you need to be very, very careful just putting a methodological evaluation in about a study that isn't what we're talking about as the title of the essay. What you can say, though, is you can say, due to the fact that supporting research by Ash used a task that is not like tasks used in day-to-day life, that leaves the theory behind it, normative and informational social influence, as not supported. So you got to kind of say this evaluation is definitely talking about normative and informational social influence. So if you read that evaluation back and it doesn't mention normative informational social influence, you may have an issue with that evaluation not really hitting as well as it should do. Okay. So yeah, same is true of temporal validity. The problem is often students will be a little lazy with these generic evaluations, and it does kind of show. There's a temptation to use them all the time. You can use them, but just make sure they're shaped to the demands of the question. Okay, so a lot of you get in the real world, it can be difficult to separate informational social influence and normative social influence. So often in real life, is there a bigger distinction? Yeah, Rosie, that's a really good explanation of ecological validity and mundane realism, the distinction between them, because a lot of people get them wrong. So what we can talk about, and some of you have put this out already, is we can talk about often we talk about situations leading to conformity, like different situations for normative and informational social influence come about. But actually, there are just some people who are dispositionally more or less likely to conform. And we had two examples there. Conversation about internal versus external locus of control, and something called N-affiliators, who are just simply people who are more needing and more craving of social approval. Okay, so we are now going to go into variables affecting conformity. Ash, so you might want to get another piece of paper or carry on with me in the chat. Let's start off. Now, I find that AQA has been quite clever, or you could possibly say sneaky here, with how they've written the spec. If you look at how the spec is written, it says variables affecting conformity, and something similar with Milgram as well, which is when the questions come up, you'll be asked about the variables. But of course, you do need to know about Ash's original study to understand how the variables work. But don't get too wrapped up into knowing the original study in masses and masses of detail, or thinking that you need to write lots in any exam about the original study. You've kind of got to get it across in as few words as possible. But we do need to understand what happened in order to understand how the variables worked. So let's start with that. Let's give a description of what the original study did. So don't do the results yet. Talk to me about the setup. Talk about the methodology. So, if you get a question on methodology, what is the recipe of the study? Tell me what happened in Ash. Go for it. The original study. Go for it. Okay, that's good. We're building it together. Okay, this is good. We've got pretty, more information than we necessarily need. Some people diving into the variations already. We don't need to do that just yet. Some people getting a little bit confused in between Milgram. A lot of people going into like the number of males used. I mean, if we're talking about the variations, and we maybe want to say a little thing about the original study, the number of participants probably isn't necessarily in the original study isn't necessarily that much. What importance is it really that there's a certain number? What we need to do is like what was done to these people and what was found in as few words as possible. So people were asked to complete a line judgment task in a group. The point is they were deceived. So it wasn't a judgment or a line judgment task. It was obviously a test on conformity. Of course, you had to deceive them because otherwise the actual study wouldn't work. And yeah, there's some like disagreement about the exact number of people in the original study. 7 to 9 is usually taken fine, but if you've got a slightly different number than that, that's fine. And of course, didn't see these. Oh, we had a few people saying it. The other people are Confederates, so it's nice to see that terminology in there. A lot of what you're looking for is the correct terminology. So the use of Confederates. So we're asking the group which comparison line, and we had that from a few, was the same as the standard line. And yeah, a lot of you talking about there were some practice goes in which they gave the right answer, but on the critical trials, the Confederates gave the wrong answers. That's about as much as we need to say about the setup. So yeah, there was only one real participant. Okay, let's go and talk about results. Give me some results, everyone. Yeah, 75 at least once. Okay, so I'm a little bit of confusion on the percentages. I would remember these percentages if I could, because we're going to be using these as comparisons to the variations. And yeah, there's some interesting things, like the 5% conforming in all 12. It's interesting to see that even in the study of conformity, we've got a situation in which not everybody, very, very few people will conform every single time. I mean, that tells us something about the situation. People are resisting. People are sat in that room and they are resisting this group, but eventually they just kind of get ground down. So I think it's kind of interesting. Okay, 35 conformed at least once, 32% conformity rate, 5% on all trials. Okay, and if you're drawing this at home with me, if you're following in, we're just going to do a little example of the cards that were held up. I wouldn't do this in your exam, but just as a, just to make the mind map work. But yeah, if you're following me live and you're chatting, you might want to come back to this and try and do this on your own and see if you can remember what we're about to talk about before we do it. Okay, so there is the ASH setup. We're now going to talk about the variation, or the variables, and we'll start off with group size. So in as few words as possible, tell me what happened in group size and just kind of after the results. So give me a time. Or if you're not following this live, then film the poster as we go. Very good. Okay, we don't need to get too tied up with the percentages, but it does tell an interesting story, doesn't it? So, with just one person, so you sat there with another person, and that person getting it wrong, the conformity rate on the critical trials was only 3%, so very low. I mean, I'm surprised it's even as high as 3%, because obviously you just sat next to someone who's just getting it wrong. It doesn't rise that much, I don't feel, when there's two people telling you that you're wrong. We are able to resist that because the conformity rate was only 13%, because it's obvious that they're wrong. But it seems to shoot up really significantly to 33% with 3 people, which is, very similar to the original study, which means that even as it kind of holds at that level, if you're able to resist 3 people, you're able to resist a room full of people. So it's just a very interesting pattern there. It's easy to resist a small group of people, but if you are able to resist, 3 people, chances are you can resist an entire room. Okay. So there is our group size, everyone. The next one we're going to do is unanimity. So we've got some really good responses there from a bunch of you. Well done. Let's go for unanimity. And give me a bit of terminology here about kind of what's going on. What's the reason for the change in conformity that we see with unanimity? Jasmine, tips for cramming. This is kind of what I'm doing for cramming. This is like a 2-hour video covering all the bases of one unit. So follow this. Obviously, I've got shorter 20-minute videos, but they can be a little overwhelming. Yeah, 25% I've seen around, but there's not the percentage I go with, because I go with a percentage that was in a past paper from a few years ago. Does anybody know the percentage rate that I go with? Yeah. Okay, the term I wanted was as you put down correctly, social support. So in the unanimity variation, we have one confederate providing social support by disagreeing with the group. Now, I know there's situations in which they disagree with the group and they say the right answer or they say the wrong answer. That doesn't seem to matter. And obviously, people probably know the other study where the participant or the confederate who disagreed with the group had thick glasses, which is kind of funny. And that still worked. If we have anyone who is able to provide social support to us, we will decrease our conformity very, very significantly because we have an alternate an alternate group to be a part of. So this variation can be used as a social support part of the topic. It certainly can be, and I would definitely use it because it's one less thing to remember if you can use this as a research evaluation. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so I think we're done with the basic information that we'd need about unanimity. If you had an essay on this, we don't need to say much about group size unanimity or the next one, which of course is task difficulty, but we do need to give some basic information that is correct. So task difficulty, let's have a go at this. What happened? No, thanks, Rosie. Okay. So when the difference between the line length is small, conformity increases, and then we have got there due to the role of informational social influence. Yeah, so the answer is more unclear. I feel like you would still be able to tell, but that seed of doubt that's added is enough to increase the conformity. It's an example of informational social influence and normative social influence. So it is a combination. I'd still probably say the fundamental reason that people are conforming is due to normative social influence, but there is a slight addition of informational social influence, and then conformity massively increases, which shows that is a factor. Okay, so we've got Ash's original study. We've got the variations lined up. Let's now think about some evaluations. We would be talking here about the variations, the studies themselves, so we can talk up methodological evaluations. But let's throw some evaluations in here into the chat, and we'll see if what you have is similar to what I've got. So yeah, try not to look at notes or anything like that. Just try and use your own memories. Okay, looking good. I'll hit play now because I think we've got a bunch. If you're following along not on the live stream, you might want to just see if you can note them down before I reveal them. Okay, so the first thing that we'll talk about is obviously Ash, and if it's talking about Ash, we're talking about the variations. We, as a positive, have high internal validity. So if we're talking about a concept like, we're saying, it's a lab study, which means it has a high internal validity, be very careful that you continue our evaluation on. Because it's a generic evaluation, because anybody could talk about high internal validity for any lab study, pick something out of that study that was kept consistent, that only works for that particular study. So in ASH and the variations, participants viewed lines. That could be kept consistent across the trials. There were confederates with responses. Those could be kept consistent across the trials. So that's my advice there for you whenever we're using a methodological evaluation, is make sure that we are picking something that's unique about that study. I did see Parent and Spencer in the chat, and they did have a criticism of ASH. I know they also had a study, but I've not included that. I've just included the general criticism they have. So this is about, and I've seen these on here, temporal validity. Can anyone tell me why there is an issue with temporal validity here? What was Parent Spencer saying? McCarthy is a very nice term. You are totally right. If other people haven't heard that term, don't worry about it. I was simply going into the idea behind the Cold War America. Lovely term, child of the time, was used by them. That's correct. So usually, people often ask about memorizing dates. I usually would say don't worry about it. But if you are going to use a temporal validity evaluation, then maybe it is a point to remember a date. Let's go for another evaluation, and we're going to talk about bond here. So tell me about the bond evaluation. What did they do? What did it find? So not everyone would have used bond as an evaluation. I think it's particularly useful, especially if people are talking about ASH being problematic because it was Americans. Okay, so maybe no one here uses bond. So someone asking about explaining McCarthyism. So the Cold War America political system, people were worried about infiltration by the Russians, and everyone was very suspicious of everyone. Everyone was checking up on everyone. So it led to a sense of political paranoia that anyone could have been a spy. So in that kind of environment, people don't want to stand out, and people don't want to go against authority. So the 1950s was seen as a time of high conformity and obedience because of that paranoia, the political paranoia that anyone might be a spy. Okay, so let's talk about bond. Now, the reason I like this evaluation is, as I said, people often criticize ASH as just being a study on young American males. When Bond did a meta-analysis of 133 studies, you could also link this to the fact that ASH is very good because of its clear procedure. It can be replicated very easily. And you could lead on to this meta-analysis. So 133 studies in 17 countries. So we look at this wide spread of conformity. Now, two things to say. One, it supports ASH. We go to different countries and we see a very similar level of conformity across all of these countries. There is some variation though, and we can pull this out because it's interesting. We don't talk about cross-cultural research enough, I don't think, but it's nice to kind of develop this evaluation point. There is a difference in conformity. When you go to collectivist countries like China, we actually see that in an ASH study, the conformity levels will go up and higher than they are in what we would call individualistic societies like the UK or America. So that's an interesting addition that you could put on there. Okay, so that's Bond's meta-analysis. Let's go on to another methodological issue. And I think we've already explained this, so I don't need to pause it. We're into some detail about the concept of mundane realism and what that means. Mundane realism is the task itself. The task of sitting in a group of strangers and looking at line lengths and making judgments on those lines is incredibly unusual. So we're not necessarily going to see conformity behavior that we would see in day-to-day life, because usually we conform in normal social contexts, places that we're in situations that we're familiar with, and we tend to conform to people we know, not necessarily people we don't know, not necessarily strangers. So we may not be seeing real conformity here with this very highly artificial task. So again, if you're going to use a terminology like validity, mundane realism, temporal validity, just add that little extra spin to it to link it to the study. That's what's going to make the difference between someone marking your essay and giving you a high score or giving you a low score. Okay, so let's do Zimbardo next. So what was Zimbardo's aim? We're going to do aim, we're going to do procedure, we're going to do findings, we're going to do what that suggests. So let's go with what was the point? Yeah. Okay. Fundamentally, and we got to be careful here because the actual section is about conforming to social roles, and I think Zimbardo gets a little lost because Zimbardo is just introduced, and it's like, oh, it's Stanford Prison Experiment, it's Zimbardo. I don't think necessarily teachers are that clear to say what we're learning here now is conformity to social roles, and we're using Zimbardo to explain that. So if you had an essay that was asking you about conformity to social roles, but it didn't mention Zimbardo, people might get really confused and talk about the wrong thing. But this section is called Conformity to Social Roles, and it is about Zimbardo. So well done for those of you that said is in there. So the question is, will mentally healthy individuals conform to the assigned social roles of prisoner and guard? And this is fundamentally a situational explanation of prison violence. Somebody in there talking about the number of participants and the fact that there's confusion in the textbook. I can tell you why that is. The reason for this is in the original paper, Zimbardo talks about the participants that are in his study, and he talks about the number of people who took part, the number of people he had in reserve, the number of people who left, and what AQA have done in a past paper is they have given the number 24. So I now go with 24. I actually gave a different number previously. The number 24 actually includes those participants that were approved for the study and kept in reserve were never used. So the full number of participants that were selected were 24, but a lot of those were on reserve and weren't actually used in the end study. So I would not worry about it. It stressed me out for years, but I wouldn't worry about it from your perspective. Okay, so would mentally healthy individuals conform to the assigned social roles, prisoner and guard? It's a situated explanation of prison violence. Let's now go for the procedure. So what are we going to say in procedure? Just shout, just blast into the chat as many things as we would put if the question was about procedure or methodology. Okay, we got lots of random allocations. That's good. Okay, be careful we're not dropping some things in there that aren't method. Okay, you've done well. Most of you have not done. In fact, basically all of you have not done what I was thinking you were going to do, which is when asked about the methodology, talking about the findings. So Again, in a real exam, it can be a very, very common mistake if asked about methodology, procedure, to include results. Now, if you do that, you're not going to lose any marks because it's, in marking, it's something called positive marking. You mark what is there, but you will waste your time because you won't be given points for that. But you guys were pretty good. So points that were made. Its procedure, it was designed, it was as an observational study. It's often called an experiment. It wasn't an experiment, it was an observation. There's it was a volunteer sample is an element of the setup. It was intended to be 7 or 14 days. That was to be decided as it went along. They were given $15 a day, whether they were a guard or a prisoner. Yeah, these lives will be uploaded. This live will be uploaded. Okay, then there were 24, let's say, males that were randomly assigned to 2 roles, and those 2 roles were what? Okay, yeah, they were prisoner or guard. And they were realistically arrested. They were fingerprinted. They were given a prison uniform. They were given ID numbers, and they were given rules to follow. That's what I filled in this poster. I know there's a lot more that we could say, but what I'm trying to do this poster is just condense down to like the fundamentals. I've not got a schedule for live streams yet. I probably will come up with that in the next few days. Okay, so if we're talking about the guard procedure, what are we going to say about the guards? I know a lot of you have typed this in already. Yeah, we've got uniforms. They were given clubs. They were given whistles and sunglasses, and they worked in teams of 3. I feel there's less that we can say about the setup of the guard roles compared to the prisoners, because a lot of what happened to the prisoners when they first entered. But it's good to have something to say about each of them. And then some of you put down as an element of the procedure, which is correct, the fact that Zimbardo had a dual role. That is a part of the procedure. He set this up in such a way that he was, and do we have the terminology right? What was he? He was the chief prison superintendent and the lead investigator. It depends on you, Sarah, about what you're able to reproduce in the exam. If you're at the point now where you can turn a little point into a more extended A3 paragraph, then stick with the little points. That's probably the ideal because you can remember more, you can cover more content then. But yeah, some people do feel the need to just memorize an entire paragraph. Prison warden would be okay. Okay, so that's our procedure, everyone. Let's now go into the findings. So give me some findings, some general ones, and also ones for the prisoners and the guards. You don't need to know every single one of these facts. I've boiled it down to a relatively small amount. But, if you've got a 6 marker on the procedure of Zimbardo, which there has been before, you're going to want a fair few things to say. Okay, we've got some good stuff there. Some good stuff there I haven't put down, actually, but about the participants leaving early. Okay, but fundamentally, what is Zimbardo looking for? Did he find it? So, did participants adapt to their assigned social roles? What do we think? Yeah, they did. Well, according to Zimbardo's reporting, they did. Not all, certainly not all, especially when it came to the guards. Not something I'm going to go into a lot of detail here, but yeah, certainly, only 1/3 of the guards were exceptionally aggressive. So, why were the prisoners? They did initially resist. They showed signs of stress. They showed anxiety. They also ultimately showed passivity, which is what we'd expect from a prisoner. Okay, and then we're also going to talk about the guards. What did they show? What kind of behavior did they show? I don't know if you guys have seen the movie for Zimbabwe, the Stanford Prison Experiment, but it's absolutely fantastic. The Stanford Prison Experiment movie seems to just be like shot scene for scene based on the original footage. It's so good. And there's great actors in there. Impressive that you got through all of the Lucifer Effect. The Lucifer Effect is a very, very thick book. Okay, so sadistic aggression and domineering behavior is what we're going to go for there. And of course, the findings is, it was so extreme that we had to be cancelled within 6 days. And that fundamentally was for ethical concerns. There was a recent thing as to show that Zimbardo seems to have fundamentally told the guards how to behave. Yeah, if you go into my longer video for Zimbardo and I have got a critical evaluation, the researchers did a pretty good job of kind of pulling apart Zimbardo's study as not being particularly well controlled. Possibly part of the reason that it's not on the spec. The stream's planned to last 2 hours, but to be honest with you, I think it's probably going to take like 3 hours. So I imagine lots of people are going to dip in and dip out over that time. But also it's going to be recorded as well. But if you want to be part of the actual stream and chat to me, then this is the moment, really. Okay. So I'll just leave this running for suggests. So situational factors can drive prison violence. I mean, fundamentally, that's what his paper was on. You read the original paper, and he is interested in, changing prisons in America. And then what we might also say is it was important for Zimbardo that he used healthy individuals. You got to think this is the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Stanford University students. This is like the Ivy League. This is the Oxford and Cambridge of America, effectively. And you've got these particular high achieving students reverting to the extreme behaviors that we saw in the study. So obviously this isn't a dispositional argument. There's a situational argument, but even people who would suggest would have strong dispositions to stop them being aggressive. It seems to have happened. Yeah, it would be. We wouldn't want to necessarily discuss dispositional factors in our AO1 because they were screened in order so that there wasn't be an issue of their dispositions. Okay, that is the setup of Zimbardo, the findings, what it suggests. Let's now go into some evaluation. So I'll pause that there, and you guys can throw some at me. If you're watching this on record, then you might want to just note some of these down, bullet point them before we go through. Okay, everyone going for the pretty obvious one. Some really good things here. Okay, that's long enough for people at home on the recording to have noted things down. Let's go. Ethics, certainly, we're going to talk about. I wouldn't necessarily dive straight into ethics. Because often people overuse ethics and it's not necessarily talking about whether what was found was true or false. The real world application is good and the replication is good. So let's play this. So I criticized just through conversation before the level of control that Zimbardo have, but we do want to positively evaluate Zimbardo potentially. So what good can we say? So the good thing that we could say is, well, there was an element of control here, especially the psychological screening and, importantly, the random allocation to guards. Some of you picking up on the fact that, David Eichelman, the extreme guard, was placing guards. I wonder if it would have been a very different study if the coin had come up differently and he had been a prisoner instead. Okay, Sarah, that's great. Okay, and then we also had Abu Ghraib, which is an example of real world abuse that does seem to be a very similar pattern to Zimbardo's prison study. Okay, yes, there's some really good ones. Yeah, a cost benefit analysis is a very nice way of wrapping together multiple evaluations that are kind of alternate. I think it works well, and particularly for Milgram as well. Yes, it's doing great. Bianca, that's a new one to me. I've not seen that evaluation before, but it does seem interesting. So if someone in the chat wants to explain what Abu Ghraib is while I carry on. Okay, so Rachel Haslam, we can talk about the fact it was done for the BBC or not, but the point was it's probably the only similar replication, and it very clearly didn't show what Zimbardo had done. You could argue, though, because it was a TV show, people knew it was on TV, so they were acting differently. The criticism that I would definitely talk about would be the dual role situation, because of the potential for experimental bias. And his ability in that dual role to manipulate the participants' behavior was very problematic for the study. You could lead on from that as well into a conversation about the ethics and about the fact that he might be resistant to cancel the study because he was in the role of prison superintendent. Temporal validity, you could. It might have been different because it was a lot later. I think for all of these social influences, you could talk about behavior changing over the course of time. Like temporal validity works really, really well in social influence because culture can affect behavior so much, whereas it wouldn't work so well in, say, memory. Okay. We're now moving on, everyone. We're now moving on to resistance. Actually, are we? Yes. Probably should have ordered these a little different, actually. Oh well. We are moving on to resistance now, anyway. So, first element of resisting obedience and conformity is social support. I have done Milgram. For some reason, I've ordered this not in the best way, but it's fine. I expect that we'll be all right with this. So, first of all, can people give me a definition of what social support is? Let's say we'd been given a free marker or 4 marker to explain what social support actually is. What are we going to talk about? So we got to get into some level of detail here with social support. What are we going to say? We now have a really good answer for the number of evaluation points. It's too detailed for me to go into now, but what I will do is I will send you a link to a video that I made a little while ago, 2 months ago, which is all about essay writing. And I'll even put in the time code for you as well. Here we go. And I'll explain how many evaluations to use and how it depends on a few different factors. Maybe watch that later. It's definitely AQA. Okay, maybe we could talk a little bit as well about how social support affects conformity or obedience, because we want a little bit more to talk about. We could talk about that distinction. What's going on with this level of social support in a situation where we're with a group or where there's an authority figure? Because it does affect both. If you were just asked to define social support, we wouldn't need to necessarily bring in studies. Okay, so then we're going to talk about why. Okay, let's have a go at this. I'm going to give you a written out section here. So first of all, like, just what is a definition? What is social support? So social support is the presence of others who defy authority figures or go against the majority. So a very simple definition there of what social support is. Just simply the presence of others who are doing that defying. So what is happening in the mind of the person who experiences social support, of the experience of someone else going in against the authority figure or the group? Well, it's going to provide something called a diffusion of, Izzy's done really well, a diffusion of responsibility. Now, there's an element here of social support. The more resistors there are, the more people who resist an authority figure or the group, the less risks there are to any individual. So it's about the risk of, say, embarrassment or being punished. If someone else is going up against the authority figure and then you go up against the authority figure, the chances of you being punished is lower because now there's two people in the situation. Often when it comes to conformity and obedience, there's a sense of isolation that you kind of, you think about Ash and we have all of these people saying the wrong answer. You're going to feel quite isolated there. You don't have a group to belong to. So you might just conform because of that feeling of isolation. So in this situation, we're countering feelings of isolation. Yeah, lots of people have a diffusion of responsibility. Yeah, that's good. I mean, part of the reason that we're here is to quite a lot of you will be familiar with a lot of the content that we come up across. But for hopefully each of you, you'll pick up a few things that will help make this section clearer. Okay. Conformity, or when it comes to conformity, what's going on? So we've got a non-conformist ally that's breaking the group's and unanimity. And what they're doing, that non-conformist ally, is they're making a new group for us. We can now join that new group. So yeah, no, I'm not going to do essay plans this year. This year, my main target with these live streams is to make a set of posters where we can summarize an entire unit down to an A3 sheet of paper. So that's going to be a lot of work for me this year. But the essay plans are still available on the Patreon, Mahila. You can still fill them out, but I won't be filling them out live. Okay, so disobedient role models challenge, and then what are they challenging? Some of you typed that up. Or you're writing it down. You may was the first one there with, yes, the challenge of a disobedient role model is we're challenging the legitimacy of the authority figure. So we've definitely got more than enough information there. More than enough information there to fill out any AO1 that we might need about social support. We've given a definition, we've linked it to obedience, we've linked it to conformity. I didn't pause this soon enough. We're going to talk about evaluations. We're going to talk about Milgram as an evaluation. Let's go for it. I'm going to give you a hint. It's a variation of Milgram that I want to talk about. What are we talking about as a social support Milgram variation? If you read the original Milgram book, I think there are about 30 variations. So it's kind of good that they were only asked to memorize 3. So this isn't one of the variations we've been asked to revise. Yeah. Yeah, Milgram spent most of his working life varying this study. Okay, so yeah, in this variation, as you've pointed out, we had dissenters. So we placed our participant with another 2 people who also did the role of teacher, and at some point, they both refused to continue. And then we've got a massive drop in obedience from 65 to 10%. And actually, I'm surprised it's as high as 10%. When they've given you an out, I'm amazed that it's not higher. Okay. Okay, good. That variation is not named. The one in which they had a dissenter wasn't named. Could we get a 60 mark on just social support resistance social elements? I do not think so. AQA are very clear that they can use any part of the spec however they want. If it's named on the spec, you need to know it. But when it comes to sections like that, I'd expect to see an 8 marker. Okay, let's go for conformity. So we want 2 pieces of research for social support here, 1 on obedience, 1 on conformity. What we're going to use here for social support. I'm trying to keep up with the comments here about the content. If you want this poster, you can download it from the free section of the Patreon resources. So yeah, just this poster though. It's just like a sample one. And then I'd print it. I think you can print it in A4 or A3, but obviously A4 will just be like 2 halves. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're looping back now to a variable affecting conformity, and we're talking about the unanimity variation of conformity. If we just wanted to memorize 1 research evaluation, just do the ASH one, because obviously we need to remember ASH anyway. Okay, so then I'm going to come up with a criticism. Can anyone throw in what a criticism of the social support explanation for resistance is? So we're saying we're resisting obedience and conformity because in a situation we have somebody else that we can rely on, and that's the reason that we are resisting. Yeah. Incomplete explanation. Some still obey. So if we've got, and here's just a general piece of advice: if we've got, say, a situational explanation for obedience or conformity, as an evaluation, we can counter it with what is known as a dispositional explanation, which is the fact that it's personality. So it's either the situation that's causing the obedience or conformity, and we can vary the situation and obedience and conformity, or it's the personality, and we can vary that. Okay, let's go for that as a write-up. So we can reflect back on those pieces of research and say, in the variations with social support, we did still have 10% who still obeyed in Milgram. And I think that's really weird. You've got two people next to you who have refused to go on. You've got all the cover you need to stop. So why on earth would you carry on? And then 5.5% still conformed in ASH, suggesting disposition is important. Like, I think the 10% one for Milgram is absolutely wild. And yeah, you could bring in disposition. Let's say if you just had a short essay on social support, like an A marker, yeah, maybe I'd bring in locus of control there. Although maybe we've got a 16 marker, which includes both of them. So those of you that are waiting on full answer there, so you can note it down on the poster. Okay. There we go. My next live stream, I think it will be on memory. I'm not 100% sure though. Let's go. I will do attachment eventually. Although what I'm probably going to do is live stream with the chat for patrons, and then I'll probably put it on live on YouTube for like maybe a day, just so people do get some use out of it, because I do like to help as many people as I can. But then I'll probably make them disappear, but then keep them in a playlist for patrons up until the exam, because I do feel bad making it and no one getting access to it. But yeah, I'm still figuring stuff out, everyone. Social support is done. I think we've got a good definition. We've got a range of evaluations, and that's enough for an 8 marker there. Let's go on then, of course, to locus of control. So let's do what we've been doing previously. Let's give me some AO1. You'd have to give me all of it, but together let's build it up. If you're watching me on record, then maybe you want to note this down either on your whiteboard, or you might want to try and fill in your mind map before I do it. Oh, well done for using the app. 32-day streak is very impressive. Thanks so much for that. Took a lot of time. Okay, let's go for it. You guys have done really well. I'm surprised anyone who watches my videos doesn't know there's an app. I always plug it at the start of all the recent ones. Okay, Rotter, yeah, we're good. We're good. I think you guys have done really well there about outlining what it is itself and what the elements of internal and external are. So maybe the things, if we had a lot to write a locus of control, we're going to give it a definition. We're going to define internal locus of control and external locus of control. But we could maybe also talk about how it affects conformity and obedience, because this is resistance in general. It maybe works just a little differently to conformity and obedience. So maybe we can pull that apart. I mean, those guys who have been using the app and you have streaks and you like it, it would mean a lot to me if you gave it a review, like hopefully 5 stars, but because I don't get a massive number of reviews on the App Store, but that would be cool if you like it. Just go on the App Store and go on SiteBoost, and they should be giving you an option there to review it. But yeah, if you like it, then that's awesome. It took a lot of work to put it together. Okay, so Rotter personality trait. A lot of you mentioned there is a personality trait, and it's measured on a scale. But fundamentally, we're talking here like, where do people feel their success and failures come from? And of course, the cause of those success and failures. So 2 different types of people. Obviously, we've got someone who is high on the scale of internal locus of control. And for these people, they believe they have personal control. The element that's important for having personal control, though, is they take responsibility. So if we're talking about internal locus of control, fundamentally, we're talking about responsibility here. And that element of responsibility says, well, I'm responsible for my behavior, so you're going to be kind of proactive in making your decisions yourself. I hope you enjoy it. I don't do personal tutoring just time-wise. Like, it takes so much of my life to do the YouTube stuff, and I obviously teach as well. So, don't have time for tuition right now. And then we have external locus of control. Maybe I might do it at some point, but maybe not this year, because I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing getting these posters ready this year. External locus of control. We could believe in external factors, obviously. So maybe we want to name some, like fate, luck, powerful others. So if you think that you are controlled by these powerful others, you may feel a little bit less empowered to resist yourself. Do I have an internal or external locus of control? I really hope that I have an internal one. I would hope that it seems to be, but everyone wants to be, don't they? Everybody would say they wouldn't conform in Ash and they wouldn't obey in Milgram, but Okay, so we've got a definition there of internal locus of control. We've got a definition there of external locus of control. So tell me why internal locus of control are less likely to conform. So let's go with conformity first. Everyone type that out. Yeah, actually, I haven't done an external locus of control test. I've done the F scale. Great. The kind of the opposite. I was probably more left wing than most of my students. They also did the attachment questionnaire as well, which is funny. Okay. So when it comes to conformity, as we've said, as some of you have said, internal locus of control are more likely to resist conforming because they think that their fate comes from, the responsibility for their actions comes from within them. They can trust their own judgment, so they don't seem to be pulled by others. So, and also there's an element, if you know that you're in control of your own decisions, you feel responsible for those decisions. Yeah, that's really well. You phrase it better than I ever, Zara. Their sense of personal agency encourages them to stand by their conviction. That's nice. I don't know. If they join my live streams. I do try to keep these things quite separate, what I do in class and what I do online. Okay. The posters are on my Patreon. You can get the social influence one for free right now. Okay, on to obedience. So we've got internal locus of control, resist obeying as they, again, trust their own judgments. And again, probably responsibility as well. Let's go into some evaluations now. Let's go into evaluations. What are we using? I've got 2 research studies for us to talk about. Okay, so yeah, we've got Holland and we have Spectre. Let's start with Holland. Can anyone give me any of the percentages from Holland? Oh, wow, actually may have straightened there as I was literally saying it. So yeah, Holland was fundamentally a Milgram replication. And then we measured their locus of control. As we've done that, and as I'm right now, maybe you can do Spectre for me as well. Can someone tell me what happened in Spectre? What was going on there? So what would in the question that we would talk about Holland, let's say that we have a short essay asking about locus of control and resisting social influence. And we're like, well, is it true that having an internal locus of control helps you resist obedience and conformity? Well, in this case, it is obedience, because we're using Holland for obedience, we're using Spectre for conformity. It does seem to be true that people with internal locus of control, at least slightly, seem to be more able to resist obedience, because in Milgram, in a replication Milgram study, we did seem to have that effect. So we've got here the AO1 of locus of control, and then we're like, is it supported by research? Holland suggests that it is. So what I've got here, is Holland for obedience and Spectre for conformity. It'd be interesting to know if we could be asked about locus of control's effect on obedience or conformity. I've never seen a question like that. But so where's Spectre? Does anyone tell me Spectre? Yeah. Let's. Okay, we haven't got many people with Spectre, but if you want a research study for conformity as well as for obedience, this was simply a questionnaire, sets of questionnaire. Need to know. There's an interesting question here, and I like that you've brought up, do we need to know Spectre? all you need to know is what is listed very clear in the specification. So like, what can AQA ask you about is what's named in the specification. And actually the specification isn't particularly large. So we can be very clear about like, we need to know this. Now, knowing about that thing, we're going to need to have supporting knowledge of that concept. So there are a range of evaluations and research studies that we can know about to support what's known in the spec. Now, I make my decisions on what to include in my videos. Pretty fundamentally, I don't make a secret of this. I use the AQA past papers mark schemes. Like I'll look to if there's a 16 marker on a topic, that's absolute gold for me because it'll have the AO1 clearly laid out and the evaluations clearly laid out and the research that we're expecting to see. And I'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to use those because my thought process is if they used it 1 year, then it's acceptable and that might be repeated in a mark scheme in the future. Kind of gives me a little bit of an advantage to say like textbooks, for example, because all the textbooks, some of them have been updated recently, but they were written before the specification even came out. And obviously I refresh my videos quite frequently. So, I completely redid the social influence unit relatively recently. That was one of the first ones I made. And then I was like, well, I'll do a load of things differently because of what I've seen come up in mark scheme. So do you need to know Spectre? No, but it has come up in past paper mark schemes. If you're using past papers right now and the mark schemes, and you are seeing lots of things that you didn't learn in class, don't freak out, because often the mark schemes need to include a lot of things because there are lots of ways that you can support an idea. So they're showing the range of ideas that students can use. So yeah, you come across some terminology or some studies that you don't recognize, it's absolutely fine. Okay, thanks for that question. I think it's a good one. So yeah, I'll repeat Spectre. So what you've got here is you've got a bunch of participants, 157 participants. We had their locus of control measured through a questionnaire and their tendency to conform on normative social influence and informational social influence measured as well. But all of these are questionnaires. And then what we tend to find, an interesting element here, is participants with an internal locus of control, they were able to resist normative social influence. So they were able to resist the desire to fit in, but they didn't resist informational social influence. And actually, that kind of makes sense because, if you are someone who with an internal locus of control, you don't necessarily assume you're always right. You just kind of assume that you're in control of your own decisions. And if someone changes your decision through rational argument, then you'll go with it. So that kind of makes sense to me. I kind of like it. Hopefully that helps. Do you get marks for general evaluations of area 3? Of course, as long as they're shaped clearly to the demands of the question. I know I've given you a few examples and I'll come up with more of them as we go, of generic evaluations, the way that we might just shape them to match the question rather than just floating there. Okay. Let's go with the next question, which is the next evaluation. What is the problem, especially with Spectre and Holland and these research studies? There's a problem with both of these. What is it? Yeah. Okay, we've got a relationship here between locus of control and resistance, but we can only seem to measure these as correlations. Yeah. So there could be other factors that influence resistance to social influence, like, your social status might affect both your locus of control and your ability to resist, the level of anxiety you tend to feel, or your sense of morality. So it was a spell mistake. Oh dear, I'll fix that at some point after the stream. Okay. So I'll reveal this now. If you are following along after the stream and you're filling the poster in, it's about to all be revealed and you'll be able to fit that in. If anyone wants to ask me any questions now before we move into obedience, now's your chance. But we are about to go into explanations for obedience. Holland's research wasn't for authoritarian personality. Yeah, my initial plan right now is for this live stream to stay up. But for all of the others, I might put them temporarily. But my live streams for the last 3 years have generally just been for patrons anyway. Past paper walkthroughs, I think I did up to 2022. I'm not sure. But yeah, I've got 8 research methods past paper walkthroughs. I don't know if you worked your way through all of them already. Okay. I don't think I'm getting any questions here. Spectre is showing, so I know you've asked this twice. Spectre is showing that if you have an eternal locus of control, you are more able to resist normative social influence, which is the argument for locus of control. That people with a disposition, people with a personality in which they feel in control of their own fate, that seems to be correlated with an ability to resist normative social influence. You could add on to that, this doesn't seem to be the factor of informational social influence, but that's kind of up to you. I'm planning... I'm not planning to make any more research methods exam tutorial videos. I've got like 17 hours already, and yeah, my entire life for the next few weeks will be prepping these posters. This poster took me a long time to do, so knowing how many more I've got to do, my life will just be making these, because I'm trying to make them as clear as I possibly can. Okay, let's go for obedience, and we've got 2 explanations for obedience. Let's go into agentic state and legitimacy authority. Yeah, I do like a 4-hour live stream the night before exams. Usually that is quiz based, and it will be this year quiz based as well. Okay, so we've got agentic state and legitimacy of authority. Let's go with agentic state then. Let's give that a definition. I've got 3 bullet points. If you had a free marker, outline the concept of agentic state, what are you going to say? Agentic state is situational. So, Honlas, if you're thinking of its situation, in certain situations we are in an agentic state, who would come up with a situational argument? Okay, so if you're watching this not live, you should be writing this down maybe on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, or trying to pre-fill in the poster. Okay. I think we've got everything there in the chat, so let's carry on with watching me write this out. So, agentic state, so we see ourselves as what is known as an agent. So we is where we're not working for ourselves, but working on behalf of someone else. And obviously this is obedience. We're working on behalf of an authority figure. So there's an element here which I changed. I talked about changing the social influence unit. I changed this from not just not feeling responsibility, but also in a past paper mark scheme, there's also the note that they don't feel guilt as well, which surprises me a little bit because obviously we think about the Milgram video. If you've seen the original footage or one of the replications, they seem really guilty. They seem really guilty, and they seem to be carrying on despite the guilt, which is kind of scary. Obviously, we've got an element in the Milgram study where they say, when interviewed afterwards, that they didn't feel responsible, especially as the experimenter says they took responsibility. But yeah, I've added on the individual doesn't feel guilt or responsibility. Okay, and then we have what some of you have noted down is the concept of an agentic shift. So a couple of you have mentioned that quite well. Well done, including CZ. Yeah, agentic shift, moving from what is known as an autonomous state to an agentic state. And we could actually, we're going to pick up on this again in one of the in potentially explanations of what is going on in the variations of Milgram. So the social influence unit is really nice in the fact it ties all into itself. And when we're talking about explanation for obedience here, we can talk about these in the concept of situations. Okay, let's try and keep the chat as tight as we can to the actual content, guys. So that's the 3 points that I would put down for agentic state. Let's go on to the other concept, which is legitimacy of authority. So tell me 3 things, or you can tell me 1 thing, but like I'm going to give you 3 things to talk about here about what is legitimacy of authority. Okay, we've got some good there. And the process. So we have got socialization, teachers' positions in the social hierarchy, and who to obey. A lot of you there talking about the concept of socialization in leading to our understanding of legitimacy of authority. So it's definitely a term that you're going to want to include in this essay. Yeah, we've got some people jumping ahead already to Milgram. We can definitely use that in our evaluations. We've got some examples of authority figures with legitimacy as well. Okay, and then if you ask people, if you actually talk to people about legitimacy of authority, people will agree that we actually do need legitimacy of authority to function. So it's not necessarily seen as a bad thing. And then I think we didn't necessarily have that. By socialization, does it mean we learn it from others? Yeah, especially parents, peers, and teachers. So we didn't mention, and we can talk about this in our AO1 of legitimacy of authority, is how we communicate it in society. We communicate legitimacy of authority with visible symbols. Now, those visible symbols, of course, can include uniforms or settings, and then that'll lead us on to our evaluations. Okay. That's our AO1 points for agentic state and legitimacy or authority. So now let's have a little think about our evaluations here. Now we want to make this as simple as possible. So let's go into our research evaluations. What are we going to use? I don't think there's necessarily a surprise here because I think people have said it already. Okay. You're not wrong in saying Bickman. Obviously, Milgram and Milgram's variations are named in the spec, so I don't necessarily want to overwhelm you, but I do know that basically everybody in the country learns Bickman as well. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to stick to Milgram in this section, but I will talk about Bickman elsewhere in this poster, so I'm not going to ignore it completely. But if we just want a very simple evaluation, we can reduce the legitimacy of authority and we can reduce obedience. And we've got two examples there with uniform locations. So if I'm saying legitimacy of authority is communicated with visible symbols like uniforms and settings, then we can definitely express this. We can definitely test this by altering the uniform location variations. We can also use the proximity variation to talk about the movement to an agentic state. So if you think about like the sensation of feeling like we are the agent of someone else, that sensation is reduced the further away that person is to us in proximity. Okay. So we have the Milgram evaluation as a positive. We can, and I've spoken this before, talk about methodological criticisms. So we've just said that Milgram's own ideas of agentic state and legitimacy authority are supported by his own research and his variations. How could we undermine that? How could we undermine the strength of Milgram in supporting his own ideas? I would definitely avoid bringing Zimbardo into any essay on obedience. It would be too easy to get lost in there. Keep Zimbardo for conformity to social roles. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm not saying there isn't a path to getting to a good evaluation, but there's too many ways of messing it up and the examiner not to be sure whether you're talking about actually talking about obedience. Yeah, okay. So we've got methodological flaws, of which there are a range. You can talk about a few. I will very briefly note here about mundane realism. I like that one. We'll also throw another one in as well, which you've talked about as demand characteristics. But as I mentioned in a previous part of this video, I really want to emphasize if we're talking about a methodological issue, bring in some element of that study that was problematic. So, if you're talking about mundane realism, talk about, the obedience situation was very unusual. The using of an electric shock generator is not a way in which we would behave in day-to-day life, or not an activity that we would use. You could maybe then bring Bickman in. Bickman has got a bit more mundane realism and certainly has more archaeological validity. But we can then say that the research support behind legitimacy, authority, and agentic state is undermined because of these problems with the research. Remember to make that link, because then otherwise we're not necessarily talking about the title, which is explanations for obedience. Okay. And then obviously Milgram's study here is a situational explanation for obedience, isn't it? If we've got a situational explanation for obedience, what is a good evaluation to just kind of throw in that we have ready to go? Yeah. Okay. So a lot of making the A-level a little easier, especially in these last few weeks of revising, is saying, well, what's going to double up here? If we have a situational explanation, like agentic state, legitimate authority in certain situations with certain people, we will obey. We can go, well, actually, some people are just more obedient than others. So there does seem to be evidence, and we can go into some detail, obviously, in a full evaluation, but this is just a little bullet point to say there are alternate dispositional factors. Yeah, there's also some really good other evaluations in the chat. So yeah, if you're watching this on repeat, it might be a good idea to read through the chat because you guys are coming up with some good stuff. Thank you for that. Okay, so that is the full typed up version. Now let's go into situational variables affecting obedience. So in the same way that we did with Ash, and we talked about the fact that AQA will ask you about the variations and not the original study, but we do still need to know the original study to understand what happened in the variations. It's a difficult situation to be in. We want to have a sense of what happened in the original study. So let's go for it. Let's talk first of all about the setup, the procedure, the methodology. What happened in Milgram? Type that into the chat. So the original Milgram study. Let's summarize it for everyone. So not the results, but the actual original study. Because this is something that I often find that goes wrong in exams, and you want to avoid it, is getting a question on Milgram and overwriting the very, very basics of the original study. It's very unusual that we'll need to go into any sort of detail about the original study. There'll be questions about variations, but we might want to give them a flavor of it to talk about how the variations are different from the original study. Okay. So if you're at home watching this back, you might want to be putting this down on a whiteboard without looking at the chat, because the chat's doing really well. For prompts, yeah. I read that's popes then for a second. Yeah, they were told it was a memory test. Obviously, that was a deception. Great. We've got a really good explanation there of Milgram. Let's write this out. So we can talk about the number of participants if we wanted to. It's not really that necessary, or the age range, but people tend to note it down. So we got 40 male, 20 to 50-year-old volunteers on a study on memory. And of course, that was a deception. So it might lead on to that into a valuation on ethics. Some of you pointing out as well that it was, unless that was a good shout, yeah, they didn't know. I think it's a really, really clever way of doing it. A really clever way of tricking people into thinking they'd made a choice was to have two pieces of paper and get the participant to pick the pieces of paper first, and then to open it and go, it says teacher on there, and the other person takes the confederate takes the other one and goes, oh, learner, when they both said teacher on the paper. I just thought that was a really clever touch to make it feel like it was randomly made. But yeah, they were given the role of they were given the role of teacher. So obviously the professor, who was a Confederate, so the professor asked them to shock the Confederate learner. And we can talk about the device having switches from 15 to 450 volts, which most of you picked up on there as well. So I don't want to go into any more detail about the dynamics of the original study, because we can't see a question coming up on that, as in like the way it was set up. apart from the other things that we mentioned as well. So the teacher, if you resisted, they were given prompts. Some of you mentioned it was 4. That's good. And we could also say that the learner was quiet as well after 315 volts. I think that's an interesting element because you can only assume then after that point that they thought they were dead. Okay, and I think we've probably already done the percentage. So someone throw in, what was the ultimate finding of Milgram study? It's planned to be 2 hours, but we're definitely going to overrun. I think it's going to be 3 hours live stream, this one. Mostly because I'm trying to pause because you guys are coming up with some really good questions. So I want to pause if you need to answer them from me. What I'll probably be doing after this is, because I know there's quite a lot of people from the Discord in this chat, I'll probably jump over to the psych study room on the Discord video chat, and I might just start filling in the attachment poster. If anyone wants to hang out with me while I actually do the typed version. Okay, really good detailed knowledge there about the results. I've not put that level of detail in here, but that's good to know. But the fundamental finding was, 65% of participants shocked to 450 volts. Well done, May. Well done for keeping up. Yeah, as a whole, the poster does look quite good when it's filled in. Do I load live streams every day? No. When I say lives, this is a live stream where I'm kind of like presenting. What I'll probably be doing most days is when I'm making the digital version of these posters, because I'm going to have to spend hours doing them anyway, I'll probably just sit in one of the kind of video chats on Patreon, and people can ask me questions or maybe help me. But that takes me hours to do. If you can get the blank posters on Patreon, or if you've got the workbook, you can fill it in there. So yeah, that's how you get the posters. Okay. Oh, I got a little bit too far there. So that's our results for Milgram. Let's go through the 3 variations. Loads of you shouted this out in the chat, which is really good. Proximity, location, uniform. What happened in proximity? So what was changed and what was the finding? And I think if we're going to try and be precise for each of these, what was the change? What was the finding? And if you can, add in why. So proximity, what was changed, what was the finding, and the why. Yeah, I'm gonna put a post of all of the playlist. I'm gonna make a playlist of these live streams, and then they'll be accessible. The link to that will be accessible on Patreon. Hopefully, I'll planning to do about 12, I think. Okay, really good. So the 3 things I wanted for proximity is there's some elements here that people are talking about. There's a shock plate one where the participant place the hand of the learner on the shock plate. That is actually also acceptable. But I go for the phone call one. It's a little clearer exactly what happened and why, and there's a better explanation about what's happening there. So the professor, instead of giving instructions in person, they did it over the phone. So they physically increased the distance from the teacher. And you were right to say the obedience dropped to 21%. And the question is why? Like, what's going on here? And the suggestion is, in this case, there isn't an agentic shift. That increase of distance reduces the pressure to act as an agent of the authority figure. The percentage I have and use is 21%. Yeah, I think it might be rounded up. It's been a little while since I've read Milgram's original book. Okay. Uh, Location, everyone. I know some of you have mentioned this already, but what was changed? What happened to the obedience? And why? So what I'm trying to show you here, guys, is the structure that you might want an AO1 to be for getting the results for proximity, location, and uniform. We do that. We give what was changed, what happened to obedience, and the why, and we rinse and repeat 3 times. You should be pretty good on getting the points for this section. Yeah, good work, good work. Okay, let's carry on filling this out. Okay, so we've got study was conducted in a rundown office block instead of Yale University, and our obedience dropped to 47.6%, rounded to 48% if you want. And as you've noted in the chat, this is due to the influence on the legitimacy of authority. You go to this rundown office block and you just assume these people aren't legit. These people, don't have the right to tell me to do these things to this participant. So yeah, that's the drop. I feel like that is maybe too much of a complex point, Mahila. Again, you might not necessarily be wrong, but that's going to be difficult to explain. Okay, let's go for uniform now. Again, the 3 things I want: what was changed, what happened to the results, and why. Yeah, Pip, I think everyone's going to make their own choice about what they do in their revision and whether they remember exact percentages or vague percentages or no percentages. It's not the biggest thing to not include them, but of course it is nice to see them. Okay. Okay, we're good. So, you guys have got this. We got a professor that left, and they were replaced by another Confederate who acted the role of professor, and they were in normal clothes. So we took away that lab coat, and then we got a drop in obedience rate down to 20%. And again, we're seen as less an authority figure. Yeah, so we don't have the symbol of legitimacy of authority. So these visible symbol was removed. So we had reduction in legitimacy of authority. We had a reduction in uniform in obedience. So and I think an essay on this would be really good, to be honest, to be able to very clearly say these are the 3 variations. This is what was changed. This was the result. This is why. Nice and easy one to write. Okay. We can now talk about evaluations. Let's do this a little bit differently. I'm going to say my first positive evaluation is about standardized procedures. Let's do a little bit of research methods here. Why are standardized procedures, which were used in Milgram, a good thing? The question itself should be about the variations because that's what's named in the spec. Okay, so I've written standardized procedures there. What's good about that? So we're pulling this apart. We're getting this generic evaluation, but we're trying to make it match Milgram, what we're saying. Yeah, really good. The essay would be on situational variables. Okay, someone's realized already we're talking about BLAS here as an addition to this, but yeah, that's really good. So if we've got a situation here, we've got high control and we've got replication. I don't have space to write this here, but you might want to, you're going to want to bring in some element of Milgram's study. So to enable the replication of Milgram, he very clearly set out what the shock generator looked like. So if you want to replicate Milgram, you can have an exact replication of the shock generator, or you can use the exact same 4 prompts to try and bring the participant back into the experiment. So yeah, I would edit this as a little bit. I did have space here on the poster, but whenever we're using a generic evaluation, bring something in about the study to make it about that study. The way I explain this in class is you shouldn't be able to pick up and drag and drop an evaluation from one essay into another and it still work. It needs to be bespoke for that essay. So this is about Milgram. I'm talking about standardized procedures. What exactly happened in that study? Yes. So we looked in 8 countries and we're finding that Milgram's findings were very reliable. Very reliable. I think it was like, don't quote me on this, but I think it was the average across the 8 countries was 65.5. So ridiculously reliable. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay. So yeah, there we go. Pardon, we did that a little bit differently. I enjoyed that. Okay, I'm just going to blast through a bunch of criticisms now. So just throw them down. What were the criticisms of Milgram? I know there's loads of them, so just bullet point them. Okay, we've definitely got ethics now. Okay, we're good. So I'm gonna just kind of bullet pointy. I would say that in the real exam, find one of these and go into a lot more depth rather than just doing what I'm going to do and listing them out. But I wanted to show that any of these could be used. So ethics is obviously going to be a good one to go for, and Milgram basically broke every rule in the book, so you could go into right to withdraw. And obviously protection from harm as well, because it was a distressing situation. They were clearly deceived. But then we could go the other way and talk about the validity of the study itself. So, the going to a lab itself is problematic when it comes to obedience. Moves people would obey someone at work, maybe. Obviously, the shock generator and mundane realism is an issue. And as many of you pointed out there, people have reported that the participants themselves seem to think the shocks were fake. So them were clearly just acting according to a demand characteristic. Oh, there's a setup, it's fake. These people aren't really getting shocked. I'm just going to go along with this because it's fine. I'm not causing any harm anyway. I accept that. I like that. Looking at the original footage though, like those people seem to be in a lot of distress. So I wasn't 100% sure if they've actually figured out that it was fake. There's a really, really good replication that was made a few years ago, and with Michael Portillo is the person. It's hard to find on the internet now, but yeah, it was surprising that the modern people would be as obedient. All right, yeah, we've already gone straight in here to other pieces of research that seem to support Milgram's and the variations findings. So let's go for that. What research studies are we going to be using here potentially? I'm going to give 3. I know there's more. So yeah, we've got Hoffling certainly as a researcher. So the nurses, let me press play on that. You can talk about some of the other ones if you want as we go. So we've got Hoffling, 21 out of 22 nurses obeyed Dr. Smith's order to give double the maximum of a drug. So that's mundane realism. So the task there we've got, it's mundane realism and it's high ecological validity. So fixing many of the criticisms that you might have had about Milgram. In fact, it'd be quite nice to read an essay here for it to start by talking about the criticism people have with Milgram and saying, well, actually, this has been addressed by Hoffling. If you've criticised the mundane realism, you've criticised the ecological validity and go, well, actually, even with those things fixed, people are highly obedient in the right situation. Okay, Mario, unfortunately, it is A level. There are elements of this that would be helpful. Okay, so we've got mundane realism and we've got ecological validity. Sheridan and King, everyone, is the next one. I think I've seen people say that. Yeah, that's people are writing about. Let me just scroll up. A couple of you have mentioned it. What happened then, everyone? How long do I have left? After this, I have got dispositional explanations for obedience, minority influence, and social change, and then we are done. So probably another 30 minutes, I would say. Yeah. Okay, so this was to take away the issue of demand characteristics. So the argument, if you've used demand characteristics as a criticism, you can say, well, actually, we have a situation here where the shocks were real. There's no one figuring out that shocks aren't real because the shocks were real. They cause real pain to real puppies. And there's other element here. I've not mentioned this previously, but you could have said, well, actually, all the participants in Milgram's original studies, and most of the variations were males. So there's a question there about, well, maybe women would be more or less obedient, and there does seem to be a gender issue here, which is kind of wild. Which is when we had the puppies being shocked, 54% of the males shocked all the way, and 100% of the female shocked all the way, which is probably the opposite of what you'd think, because you'd think about potentially there to be more of a caring instinct, but there might also be an element of a sense of powerlessness going on here, especially in the time period that we're looking at. Yeah, I don't know how they got away with doing this as an actual study. Okay, a lot of people have talked about Bickman. We talked about previously in explanations for obedience as well. Again, we're dealing with the issue of ecological validity. We've got a more, people just on their way to work or, on the way home, and they're stopped by a researcher. There are a lot of percentages around for Bickman because there were 3 different variations of uniform and there were 3 different activities that people were asked to do. So if you've got something different than me, that's absolutely fine. But I'm looking at the most extreme variation in obedience. So in the situation where they were asked to pay for parking, we had 89% obedience for the researcher just as a guard, and we had 33% obedience for no uniform. So a big significant difference there. And the fundamental difference is the uniform that they addressed as. Yeah, so the Milgram was an element as well, but not one I picked up on because I just wanted to show the 2 extremes, the biggest extreme in one of the sections. Let's have a move on to dispositional explanations for obedience. So can you write down for me the researcher's name who talked about dispositional explanations? Yeah, we got Adorno here. So let's talk about why Adorno did the research. Someone give me a reason why Adorno wanted to know about levels of obedience. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a Milgram and Adorno were Jewish researchers who were contemporaries of each other, and they were both interested because, of course, in the 1950s, this was very recent living memory, to see what had happened in World War II. And they had conflicting ideas. So one is situational. In a situation that's extreme enough, we are all obedient. And one was dispositional. No, there are certain personalities that are predisposed to obedience. So you might want to lead off with that in any essay, making clear this is about personality. Let me just press play on that. Let's write that out. So you follow me along on the poster. We've got Adorno. Excellent. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to try and define authoritarian personality. So as I'm writing out the Adorno one on the screen, give me a definition just of authoritarian personality. Don't dip into the F scale just yet, but tell me what the authoritarian personality is. So the poster that I am using right now is the book version. So this is the book, and I have I had to reformat it because of the way I made the posters before I made the book, but I can't put any text down the center of the page when it comes to the printers that I use. So I had to redesign a lot of the posters to match the book. So I've got I think the memory one is the same, and that's the next one that we'll do. I think I redesigned the psychophology one as well. I've been having issues with that, but I think I definitely needed to do the approaches one quite a lot. I think I'll do memory later this week. We'll see how the digital version comes along. Okay, let's see what we've got here in the chat for authoritarian personality. Socialized, good. Intrinsically obey. Yeah. Socialization. Strict and harsh parental punishment. Well done, Will. That was it. We've got a few more said that, Izzy, as well. Yeah. Harsh, those of lower social class. This is A level. Probably should have done this from the beginning. Okay. That's obvious enough, but well. Let's carry that on. And so we've had most of what I'm about to put out. Harsh parenting, anger. I'm not sure if anyone mentioned this. Sorry if I missed that. Here's a little bit of background information. Adorno originally, I don't think he carried on being, but he was very influenced by Freud. So one of the concepts that he's taken from Freud is the idea of displacement. So we have this harsh parenting, and that does cause a lot of trauma, but they don't. The people with an authoritarian personality don't blame their parents. What they do is they feel that they need to. They have this anger from the harsh parenting, but they want someone else to blame. And obviously, with displacement, we put that blame onto other people, and that would be minorities. So yeah, displacement would be a nice thing to put here. Oh yeah, good chat if you put it was a psychodynamic explanation. So we've got let me just get this right. Yeah, so increased respect for people with high social status, decreased for those with low social status. And then I don't know if I missed anyone saying this, but an element that we have about authoritarian personality is stereotypes, so positive and negative stereotypes about particular groups of people. Okay, there we go. That's authoritarian personality briefly defined. I think you would have more than enough there for a free marker define authoritarian personality. Okay, let's go on to the F scale then. So what is the F scale? Okay. Yeah, so F obviously stands for fascism. Yeah, psychodynamic approach is just A level, not a S. Okay, you can talk about the number of participants that were included. Now we can't just say it's a scale that measures the authoritarian personality. We want to have a little bit more to say. So some of the things that I suggest that to bring out is someone has mentioned there are 9 factors. We don't want to talk about 9 factors or memorize 9 factors. So maybe just pick 2 that make sense. And I think the 2 that clearly express what the F scale is all about is one's called authoritarian submission, where we're completely uncritical to authority figures. The questions in there. Another one is an obsession with power and toughness. So that these people are constantly thinking about who is dominant and who's submissive in society. And there's also an element there, this obsession about power and toughness, is they identify themselves with powerful figures. So you can kind of see this in global politics right now quite a lot. There are people in charge who see themselves as tough men. And I think Adorno would have ideas about the reason these people have gone into power. I think the high obedience in World War II is a point for legitimacy of authority if it can be used in multiple ways. Like they're both trying to explain what happened in World War II, and one explanation is it's about legitimacy of authority. One is that it's about personality, and it's basically trying to provide evidence for both. Okay, so there's my AO1 for dispositional explanations for obedience. We're going to now move on to evaluations. So give me a positive research evaluation of sorts that might support the dispositional explanation. Yeah, I'm planning to do all of them live streams. The chat's probably going to be limited to patrons. Okay. Yeah, Elms and Milgram. So we can start off. So people just mentioned Milgram. We could start off just by talking about Milgram. Now you've got to keep in mind there were participants who didn't continue to the end. Milgram argues that in the right situation, any of us will be highly obedient. And he created a very intense situation to make people obey. He didn't get all of them, though. He got 65% of them, which means we have 35% of people that for some reason found it within themselves to resist. Now, one argument for that big discrepancy to have a third of people be able to resist is say, well, there's something about these people, there's something about personality going on here that makes some people able to resist and some people not able to resist. So I would, use Milgram himself as an evaluation to support potentially Adorno, because it might explain those people who were able to resist. So again, trying to do that. Okay, let's move in to Elms and Milgram. So a lot of you mentioned this in the chat. What happened here? So does someone want to type that in? Actually, A's done that already. Well done. Most participants in Milgram's study scored highly on the F scale, yeah. So we had more detail there for noted well done. 20 obedient males and 20 disobedient males. The obedient males scored high on the F scale, which is exactly what would be predicted. Obviously, it's a correlation. So we could dive into the fact that that's a correlation, but at least it is some supporting evidence. Because I've said that, and it's true that any research on dispositional explanations for obedience, because people are people have the disposition set before they get into any sort of experiment or study. So what's an advantage that situational explanations have? Oh, a bit crazy. Thanks very much for that. Thanks for dropping in and saying hi. I'm glad you found it really useful to you last year. Okay. So one thing we could talk about is if we're criticizing dispositional explanation as being entirely based on correlation, which it has to be, we can then say, well, actually, we've got a situation here where we can systematically vary and randomly assign to groups people into situational experiments. So we've got all of these Milgram variations, which do systematically change the level of independent variable that we're not able to do with Adorno. So yeah. I will put that in here. Response bias. There's a particular type of response bias. I can go into some detail with you if you want. This is called acquiescence bias. So when given a questionnaire, our initial temptation, if we're not really paying attention, we just kind of want to get it done, is just go yes, 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 all the way through. The problem with Adorno's F scale is it was written in such a way that if you said yes to everything on the questionnaire, it would have you as the most fascistic person ever. So what should have been happening is it should have been counterbalanced with half of them being yes makes you fascist and half of them making you left wing, and that wasn't done. One thing we can also talk about is it is an oversimplification to say that personality was due to World War II. There of course were many, many, many factors that were involved. Some of you might have also thrown in the fact that this is obviously a left-wing theory, so it's problematic to say that people on the right wing are mentally ill, potentially. So yeah, that was Adorno's argument. Okay. So great, we got some excellent ones in the chat as well. So if you are watching this on record, do watch the chat as well, because we've got some other good examples there. Okay, let's move on, everyone. Let's move on. We are nearly done after 2 hours and 36 minutes. I don't know how many people have been here for the whole duration, but well done if you've got that stamina. Let's move on to minority influence. Yep, that's what I've tried to do pretty much. Not every single section is a 16 marker, but each of the section you can be asked about separately. So we're just going to do a really simple definition of minority influence. Like, what is minority influence? Members of a majority are converted to the views of a minority. I know that seems relatively simple, but, just so it's clear. Now, mentioned in the spec are 3 things, and Katie has it already. If you're watching this on record, note them down first. What are our 3? Yeah. So we've got flexibility, commitment, and consistency. We're going to go into consistency first. So let's pull this up. There was a lot of trying to get the AO1 marks is to show our grasp of specialist terminology. how are we going to show off our knowledge of consistency? So there are some terms here that we want for consistency. Okay. Yeah. Diachronic and synchronic. Okay, we are good. So first of all, I'll just say that what's going on with consistency? Well, repeated messages are more convincing. We hear a message more, we're more likely to believe it. I can't remember who it was, but there was a Nazi that said a lie repeated often enough becomes truth. I think that's a phrase that we used. But let's go for a distinction. So you guys are fast. Mole, I think, is the first person to give me a bit of a definition. So diachronic is the same message over time, and synchronic is the same thing from everyone at the same time. Okay. Allows the majority to reassess their opinions. That's a nice way of putting it. It's okay if you've never heard of diachronic nor synchronic. If you've got other things to say, basically we want to have something to say about every term that could be on the specification. So you can use this if you want, but don't worry too much if you hadn't heard of it before. If you gave examples are good to give. Examples are good to give. You may want to use it for your evaluations if it's like talking about social change, possibly. But yeah, if you're trying to explain what consistency is, that would work. Okay, let's go with commitment. What is the reason, everybody, that commitment works? So what is happening with the majority? Yeah, I've not gone into it on this poster. I've not gone into the augmentation principle because it's a little bit complex, and with everything else, I feel like we're good. But what I have done is, the element of commitment is knowing that the person trying to convince you isn't trying to benefit out of it. So if you can show that someone's making a sacrifice, then they must really believe this. So they are not acting out of self-interest. Okay. Next up, we have got flexibility. So what are they trying not to sound here with flexibility? Okay, Isabel. Yes. So they don't want to sound dogmatic. Now, I've not included this in this poster, but I know that most of you be seeing the contradiction here between consistency and flexibility. Because you want to be consistent, you want to say the same thing again and again and again. Flexibility, you need to change your mind. The important element here is to have a balance between consistency and flexibility. Dogmatic, means someone who is very, very, very sure of their opinion and won't listen to other people's perspective on that opinion. So if you're arguing with someone and they're just super sure that they're right and they won't listen to your perspective, it can be really off-putting. Whereas if someone, you're having a conversation with someone, they've got a different opinion to you, and they listen to what you have to say and they reflect on that in their response, and maybe they might soften their opinions themselves, they're easier to negotiate with and you can respect them more. Okay. Yeah, a lot of terminology, guys, is kind of confusing. If I do say a term and you want a definition, kind of throw in there. I won't have a chance to do every one of them because obviously time is an issue, but I will try and help a bunch of you. But yeah, obviously I can see people helping each other in the chat as well, which is really good. So one thing I might also talk about and add on to minority influence, I feel like we've got a lot here if we go into detail about consistency, commitment, and flexibility that's named in the spec. Snowball effect wasn't named in the spec, but I do think it's an interesting element. So what we tend to find with minority influence is it starts off very, very slowly because you've got a small group of people and they're convincing the people around them to make a change. But then because they will be converted, and then we have a larger minority, and then we have then more people to convert the majority. So it starts off slowly and then it picks up speed as the majority members convert. Okay. Do you need to get no snowball effect to get full A1 marks? I don't think so. If you went into detail enough with consistent commitment and flexibility, that should be fine. But I don't see any reason why not. I think you get that. Social crypto amnesia is useful, but I think that is far more applicable, Isabel, to social change. So we'll talk about it in social change section of the poster. Okay, so we've got Moscovici now. I know a lot of you have said in the chat we're going to use Moscovici as evaluation. Can you give me a little bit of a description about what Moscovici was all about? So I've done it in a sentence. I did try to phrase it really carefully so I got as many elements of this in. Okay, do you have percentages? Yeah, very good. Okay, so Moscovici, we have a minority who are consistent in saying blue. Slides were green. When we also have an inconsistent minority as well, but I'll just stick with the consistent ones. They were more convincing to a majority. It's only 8%. So, it's very rare that they get them to say that a blue slide was green, but they did manage to do it. Whereas an inconsistent minority that constantly changed from green to blue were only 1% successful in changing the opinion of that group. So a good example of showing how consistency works. Let's do the same, and I've noticed in the chat that we have Nemeth, and can I get a description of Nemeth, please? Okay. So I just check something. Okay, yeah, Nemus was flexibility. So we've got an inflexible minority was less able to convince a majority, ski lift compensation, than a flexible majority. We've got more detail in the chat here. Three other participants and one confederate, mock jury. Okay, I'll double check that with the slide color. Consistently being shown to help minority influence member majority Muscovci display 36 blue slides of different shades to groups and 4 real participants and 2 Confederates. The Confederate majority consistently claimed every slide was green. Participants agreed in 8% of the trials. Oh, okay. I will do attachment soon. Okay. Let's finish this minority influence bit off because we are almost 3 hours into this and I don't know how much longer I can do it. Okay. I've run out of drink. Fish. Right. So one issue that we can have with minority influence is it's lab-based with no real consequences, which I imagine is what most of you would go for as a critical evaluation. Now, we can use the real-life examples of groups using consistency, commitment, and flexibility, and they're the ones that I'm going to cover in social change. So if we're going to use real-life examples, might as well use the same ones for social change because it does work, and we can expand it out a little bit. So that's why I've drawn that little arrow for consistency, commitment, and flexibility, and I've based social change around that as well. There's a lot of crossover minority influence and social change, of course. One criticism that we can use for minority influence is this is a kind of a social sensitivity issue. So research can be used to manipulate majorities. So, you've got like companies using greenwashing or maybe potentially governments as well using these ways, because governments are minorities, to influence majorities. Okay, let's go to the very last section. Well done for sticking with me. I can see some people here that have been in the chat for almost 3 hours. Well done. Let's go social change. So a very clear definition of what social change is. We can write down when societies adopt new attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. What are we going to do for the rest of the A1 for social change? Type in some of the things that you would say. We've got our definition: when societies adopt new attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. What are we going to say about social change? Mayors says social cryptomnesia. I would definitely talk about that. Drawing attention, we can talk about the snowball effect again, but I'm not going to put it in this section as well. But we definitely could talk about the social snowball effect. Augmentation principle, we could. I've not noted that down here, but it's linked to what else we could talk about. I'll get into social cryptomnesia in a bit then. Yeah. Okay, there we go. That's what I'm expecting to see. We can use the ideas from minority influence in social change. So commitment, consistency, and flexibility. So let's, as I'm writing this one out, let's just tighten it up a little bit. We could talk about social change and how it's affected, because remember, this is social influence. So there's 2 main elements of social influence: obedience and conformity. How might obedience come into play with social change? How can we change society through obedience? Who can do that and how can they do it? Yeah, okay. Jesse was probably the first one there. So when new laws have created. So obedience in that situation, when it comes to a small group of people making social change, that minority group needs to be very, very powerful. So, of course, governments are minority groups. There's only so many people in charge of a country. They come in various ways. Maybe they're elected or maybe not. But the way that they make a change is through depending on obedience to laws. And these laws can change society very quickly. Quite a few years ago, they banned smoking in pubs. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, that's never going to work. People are going to carry on smoking in pubs. People aren't going to listen to the government on that. But overnight, it just changed. And people didn't smoke in pubs. People were very obedient. People did follow the rules. So yeah, people obey to avoid punishment. Yeah, the HMRC letter was a really good example. Okay, so anti-smoking is a good example for the obedience element. What about conformity then? Let's break this into two. Like, there's two elements for conformity. There is informational social influence and normative social influence. Let's talk about informational first. How is conformity working? I don't know, sorry, let's talk about normative first. How can you use normative social influence to change society? How does that work? Thanks for wise plan. Because the problem is you can't do like everyone is with social change, because social change is about a small group of people changing society as a whole. So for change to happen as a society, we have to start off from the principle that most people are doing something different. So normative social influence is hard to do because you're like, we're already normative social influence assumes that there's a large group of people and we all try to conform with them. But something very interesting is happening with NSI. Yeah, that's a good example, Maya, for higher class introduced fashion trends which influence other classes. I've not thought about that one before. That's good. The behavior that needs to change society needs to be an influential minority group. So yeah, a good example is like high class. So it can be normative social influence if you have high class people taking on a behavior and then everyone else trying to copy it, and then suddenly society has changed and everyone's into a particular fashion. Another good example is like music choice. Like young people are very influential in what music is popular in any particular time period in history. So if young people are into a certain type of artist, then often older people will get into it as well. So yeah, the way that NSI works when it comes to social change and conformity, because they're not already the majority, they have to be an influential minority group. So yeah, then you will spread out to wider society. I actually prefer your example of higher class and fashion actually than the young people in music. Okay. So let's go for informational social influence. This is a little easier. How could informational social influence work through social change? Okay. So the majority want to be right to switch to minority. Anyone give me an example? Okay, there we go. Mayor's giving me an example. Sorry. Using facts to convince the majority. So using videos of turtles choking on plastic to prove plastic pollution is an issue. Okay, really good. So I've given the informational social influence works by convincing people. So giving people facts should be able to convince the majority. So I mean, one example might be is talking to people about the effects of climate change, and then convincing people, the majority population, that changes need to be made in society because of it. Okay, now let's go into this term, which is socio-crypto-amnesia. A lot of people have mentioned that in the chat. How about you give me a definition before I reveal mine? So socio means society, crypto means time, I think, and amnesia means forgetfulness. So hopefully putting those together works. So when a group make a lot of sacrifices in order to get their opinions across, people will forget those sacrifices that were made. They'll forget that the things they take for granted about this new way of society working was actually done by a certain group of people who sacrificed a lot. There's another element to social cryptomnesia I've not written down, which is interesting, is people will also forget that they had the previous opinion, because it can often be embarrassing to admit that you had different opinions earlier in your life about something that society has switched to. So people seem to forget that they were ever, like maybe you got some older people who were homophobic in their youth, and then now they deny it. But then you say, "Well, I heard you when I was a kid talk about people X, Y, and Z," and they go, "Oh, I never thought that." So that's an element of social cryptomnesia as well, forgetting your own perspective. Okay, I think a good way to evaluate social change is, because we can't use experimentation, of course, because it's entire societies, is to talk about particular groups that have changed opinions in society. And also what I'd like to do is link it to the ideas of commitment, consistency and flexibility. And that way you can use it in a minority influence essay as well. So let's do that. Civil rights, Amelia has written. Let's go for civil rights. How did they use consistency and commitment? Okay, yeah, so protesting consistently, all saying the same message. Commitment as well. The civil rights movement is very well known for continuing their protests, even when the civil rights movement in America, even when the police were being incredibly violent to the protesters. So when that was on TV and people could see people getting beaten up on TV, but peacefully protesting, that was an element of changing the minds of society in general. And then that led ultimately to the Voting Rights Act in America. Bloody Sunday, certainly 1965. Suffragettes is absolutely fine one to remember as well. It's a good example. So the other example I'm going to give on this poster, though, is because I can make a conversation about flexibility, is the LGBTQ plus rights movement. So I'm going to talk about consistency and flexibility and how those interact. So can someone tell me how the LGBTQ rights movement was able to use consistency and flexibility? Okay, Fair is very fast in there and good. Yes. So we have consistency in a core message. Their core message was, when it comes to rights, they want to have equal rights, especially when it came to the relationships being respected in law. So very consistent in that message. Now, obviously, at that point, they wanted marriage, but there was another option, which was civil partnerships, which didn't have a lot of the religious elements of marriage, so weren't stood in the way by religious groups in the same way that gay marriage would have been. So civil partnerships were made a thing, same legal protections, but then people became more understanding of the role of gay marriage. So it was like, well, actually, that flexibility in saying, well, okay, well, gay marriage isn't what we're going to get right now, we'll do civil partnerships, actually then led to society going, okay, this isn't such a big thing. gay marriage is fine. So very impressive technique of moving society with you. Okay, so that was that example, and I think it's a really that would be a really nice one in the evaluations of minority influence if you talked about the apparent contradiction between flexibility and consistency to show how they work together. I think that'd be a nice evaluation to move across. Okay, and our final evaluation, I think I mentioned that before, is if we are I think that's a good evaluation, Lily. It's not one that I've come across before, but if anyone reads that and likes it, I can see them wanting to use it. Yeah, I mean, not just because it's highly sensitive. It's just not possible if you are looking at the change in entire societies. It's just not possible to do this experimentally, or it would be hard to make any change. These changes seem to happen organically. It's not easy to set this up. So yeah, highly controlled lab research on social changes is just not possible. So obviously we're assuming these are how these groups have been successful, but it's, the cause and effect relationship can't really be established. Okay, so that, everyone, is the social change section done, and with that, let me just make sure that actually reveals. So maybe I didn't show. Oops, I didn't show the typed up version of that. That's unfortunate. I'm sure everyone can read it. So I hope that revision video was really useful for you. Just a reminder, I'm going to be doing some more of these over the course of the year, so do subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, you can get this digital version over on my website. I'll see you in the next one.